Welcome to the Quotive Corner. Today's quote is one I suspect most people have encountered in some form. On a locker room wall, in a graduation speech, somewhere deep in a self-help book. And because it's traveled so far and so wide, it's easy to nod at it and move on. I want to slow it down, because there's more in it than the familiar packaging suggests. Be more concerned with your character than your reputation, because your character is what you really are, while your reputation is merely what others think you are. That's John Wooden, head basketball coach at UCLA from 1948 to 1975, and widely considered the greatest coach in the history of American sports. 10 NCAA championships in 12 years, including 7 in a row. But the wins were almost incidental to what Wooden was actually building. He talked about this quote directly with his players every season, and it appears in his book, Wooden, a lifetime of observations and reflections on and off the court. Wooden grew up in rural Indiana, the son of a farmer who gave him a 7-point creed to live by when he graduated from grammar school. One of those points: make friendship a fine art. Another: build a shelter against a rainy day. He carried that creed his entire life. His pyramid of success, the framework he developed over decades to teach his players what genuine achievement looks like, placed character and industriousness at the base. Not talent, not athletic ability. Character and industriousness. Everything else was built on top of that foundation. You can't understand the quote without understanding the man, and you can't understand the man without knowing that he meant every word of it. So, the quote itself. The distinction Wooden is drawing is one that most people understand intellectually but struggle to live practically, especially now in a world that has handed everyone a platform for managing their public image in real time. Reputation has never been easier to curate. Social media, professional profiles, personal branding, the tools for constructing and maintaining a particular image of yourself are everywhere and sophisticated, and the cultural pressure to do exactly that has never been stronger. Which makes Wooden's instruction feel almost countercultural. He's not saying reputation doesn't matter. He's saying it's the wrong thing to be primarily concerned with. And the reason is embedded in the quote's own logic. Your character is what you actually are. Your reputation is what others think you are. And those two things are not always the same. The gap between them is where the real story lives. Think about what it takes to manage a reputation that exceeds your actual character. It requires constant maintenance, careful presentation, selective disclosure, the ongoing effort to ensure that what people see aligns with the image you're projecting rather than the reality underneath it. That's exhausting work, and it's inherently fragile because it depends entirely on controlling information that you ultimately cannot fully control. One unguarded moment, one person who knows you well enough to tell the truth, one situation that demands more of you than the image can deliver. And the gap closes in a very uncomfortable way. Building character, by contrast, is slower and less visible. It doesn't produce immediate external validation. Nobody likes your post because you chose to do the right thing when nobody was watching. But what it builds is durable in a way that curated reputation never can be. Because when your character and your reputation align, when who you actually are matches how people experience you, there's nothing to maintain. There's no gap to manage. The consistency is structural, not performative. Wooden understood this from decades of coaching young men under pressure. Competition has a way of revealing character that practice never quite can. You find out who a player really is not when things are going well and the crowd is with them, but in the fourth quarter, when the game is close and the easy choices are gone. What shows up in those moments isn't what the player projected in the preseason, it's what they've actually built inside themselves through the long, quiet work of preparation and self-discipline. This connects directly to what Eric Hoffer observed when he pointed out that rudeness is the weak man's imitation of strength, that what people perform outwardly often reveals something about what's missing inwardly. Reputation, when it outpaces character, is the same dynamic at a larger scale. It's an imitation of the real thing, and like all imitations, it tends to show its seams under sufficient pressure. Another prior author I discussed was Alan Cohen, who gave us the companion insight from a different angle. That pain comes not from the insult itself, but from the part of your mind that agrees with it. The person who has genuinely built their character rather than merely their reputation has something solid to stand on when they're criticized or mischaracterized. They don't need the external validation to feel real, because the foundation isn't external. They know what they've built. The gap between what people say about them and who they actually are doesn't threaten them, because they're living from the inside out rather than the outside in. Tolstoy made the point, and lived the painful counterexample of it, that everyone thinks of changing the world, but no one thinks of changing himself. Character is the product of exactly that inner work. It's not the announcement of values, but the daily, often invisible practice of them. It's the decision you make when nobody's watching. The promise you keep when breaking it would be easy and undetected. The standard you hold yourself to when holding a lower one would cost you nothing publicly. That's the work Wooden was pointing at, and it's worth naming honestly. It's harder than reputation management. It doesn't trend. It doesn't get amplified by an algorithm. It accumulates quietly over time in ways that are often invisible to everyone, including yourself, until enough of it has built up that it becomes unmistakable. Now, the honest nuance, because this show earns nothing without it. Reputation does matter. Wooden wasn't dismissing it. He was prioritizing correctly. Your reputation affects how people treat you, what opportunities come your way, how much trust others extend to you. In a world where people often have to make quick assessments with limited information, reputation is the proxy they use. Dismissing it entirely is its own kind of naivety. The point isn't to be indifferent to your reputation, it's to be more concerned with your character, because character, consistently practiced, tends to produce reputation as a byproduct. Get the foundation right and the structure takes care of itself. Chase the structure without the foundation, and you're building on sand, no matter how convincing it looks from the street. Wooden won 10 championships. He also never had a recruiting scandal, never had his program put on probation, and was described by virtually every player who ever played for him as someone who made them better, not just as athletes, but as human beings. That wasn't a coincidence. It was the long-term return on a philosophy he'd been living since a farmer in Indiana handed him a creed on a piece of paper. Character first, everything else follows. Thanks for spending a few minutes here at the Quotive Corner. If this one made you think about the gap, if there is one, between who you actually are and who you're presenting yourself to be, think about that for a bit. That's not a comfortable question, it's a useful one. As always, wisdom isn't in the quote, it's in the reflection. I'll see you in the next one.